All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, last night was obviously the first debate with Michael Bloomberg on the stage, but it was also the first debate where it was finally clear to all that Bernie Sanders is, in fact, the frontrunner. A slew of national polls have shown Bernie jumping up to a double-digit lead over the field. Here's the Real Clear Politics average, which shows Bernie leading the pack now by a full 10 points. He also appears to be leading in Nevada, thanks to his strength in the Latino community, something, of course, you risers have long known about. And as such, last night, he got the frontrunner treatment.
I don't think there's any chance of the senator beating President Trump.
But leadership is about what you draw out of people. It's about how you inspire people to act. And right now we're in this toxic political environment.
Bernie has started very much, has a good start, but instead of expanding and bringing in more people to help, instead his campaign relentlessly attacks everyone.
And you know what? He parried it all. He landed some extremely effective counterpunches and looked every bit the frontrunner that he truly is. Look, everyone else on that stage needed to make something happen to try to get back in the game. As things stand today, Bernie is well on track to march to victory. He's especially well positioned after we all saw what a hollow, condescending shell that Bloomberg turned out to be. Bernie didn't really need to do anything other than to do no harm, which he handled easily, but he also had some soaring and powerful moments like this one.
Mike Bloomberg owns more wealth than the bottom 125 million Americans. That's wrong. That's immoral. That should not be the case when we got 500,000 people sleeping out on the streets, when we have kids who cannot afford to go to college, when we have 45 million people dealing with student debt. We have enormous problems facing this country, and we cannot continue seeing a situation where in the last 3 years, billionaires in this country saw an $850 billion increase in their wealth. Congratulations, Mr. Bloomberg. But the average American last year saw less than a 1% increase in his or her income. That's wrong.
What was maybe most notable to me, though, was just how tired the attacks on Bernie really are. We keep hearing again and again how he hasn't really been vetted and how when voters find out about him, they're going to run in the opposite direction. Yet none of this mythical vetting ever seems to occur. Instead, the best that these candidates and the moderators could throw at him are the same tired attacks in most cases we've literally heard since 2016. I mean, I can't believe that here we are in 2020 and the moderators and the candidates decided that they would save their harshest attacks not even for Bernie or anyone else on the stage, but for the people who support his movement. Now, as we've discussed before, please check in with President Hillary Clinton about how well it goes when you attack the voters. Pete also wrote up a whole bit about challenging everyone on the stage to a physical as part of some dumb faux controversy about Bernie's medical records. There was a rehash of the same "how will you pay for it" hand-wringing about Medicare for all. And of course, the go-to red baiting about Bernie being a communist and how the public is terrified of socialists, even though they're apparently not so afraid of socialists as to not make one the front runner and also routinely tell pollsters they'll vote for a Democratic socialist over Donald Trump. Folks, this is all they've got. Just think. Everyone on that stage, other than Bernie, is fighting for their political life. If Bernie wins Nevada and South Carolina and rolls into Super Tuesday with a head of steam, while polling shows him leading in California and Texas, this thing could be over, and it could be over quick. They all know that. That's why they had all their little one-liners and cheap shots ready to go and a heavy scent of desperation wafting through the air. This is it. It's all they've got. The public has already rejected all of these arguments. On the health issue, he literally had a heart attack and then proceeded to surge in the polls. You really think this stuff is going to work? The media and the Democratic establishment have never understood how to approach Bernie because they never bothered to understand why he holds such appeal. They've never bothered to listen to what his supporters say about him and take their passion not as a sign of toxicity, but of true commitment to a cause that they passionately believe in. Meanwhile, Biden could never get his act together to run a real campaign, and Elizabeth Warren basically ripped Bloomberg's heart out of his chest live on TV last night. So who's left? Bernie, Biden, and Bloomberg are really the only candidates in this race who have shown any ability to build a multiracial, potentially winning coalition. Listen, back when Biden was riding high, Sauger and I would both say he won the debate just for holding his own when he didn't really need to shake up the race dynamic. Well, it's a new day, and there's a new sheriff, and Bernie did so much more than just hold his own. He was strong and he was feisty, and he handled every last thing that was thrown at him. The lameness of the attacks against him were completely exposed. His frontrunner status is unchallenged, and he heads into Nevada, South Carolina, and Super Tuesday soon thereafter with no clear rival. And Sagar, that's the thing. I think Elizabeth Warren had a really good night last night, but mostly what she did was knock down a peg Bernie's chief rival.
Yeah, she was a lot like Chris Christie in the New Hampshire debates. It was kind of around the same time period, actually. And what it was is she came out swinging in a performance that should have been there for the last, 9 months. I was like, I don't really know what happened to that person. But I think I do, which is that she'd never really had the perfect foil, and she didn't have a real message. The perfect foil for her and for Bernie was Bloomberg. That was really what brought out kind of what they were fighting for. But in terms of differentiating her from the pack, it didn't really work. And you're right. In terms of Bernie, all he had to, he was sitting there while Amy Klobuchar and Pete and Warren all got into it. Look at this. It's so clear. These attacks are not about personal animus. Maybe a little bit in terms of Klobuchar versus Pete, but I respect that. It's more like what it is Warren directly attacking Klobuchar's plan as a Post-it note, and Pete attacking Amy. That's because they all fight for the same voters, upper middle class white liberals, and they need those upper middle class white liberals to think that they are better than the other two, so that they can give them another chance in a place like Nevada. It's not going to work that well in South Carolina. That's the thing is, Biden basically disappeared from the debate, right?
Yeah,
he was gone.
Invisible.
And so, in terms of, he's still got a lot of support, and I think some of it is soft, but it's relatively there. So it really is just Bernie, Bloomberg, and Biden. Biden didn't land any shots on Bernie. Warren didn't turn any of her real. She had a few attacks on Bernie, but it didn't particularly work. And then Bloomberg and Bernie, I don't know. I thought Bloomberg came off terribly in the way that it worked out for him. He might be able to make up for it with $1 billion in new ads. So we'll see. Broadly, Sanders is the front runner. There's no question. That is what it looks like to be the front runner of the debate. And it does show you that they're still recycling stuff that they tried to use whenever some of them were on top, and they really need to update their playbook if that's going to work.
Well, and it's interesting because if you look back at the amount of attacks that were levied, Bernie took almost as much, if not as much, incoming as Bloomberg did. It's just he knew how to handle himself. Bloomberg did not at all.
He's done
obvious,
this a few times.
right? Because the attacks on Bloomberg were also very obvious. They're harder to parry because they're really actually damaging problems for him. But all of this was completely predictable. He should have had something ready, and he didn't. Bernie, on the other hand, was ready for what they threw at him, partly because they've been throwing the same tired stuff at him for 4 years, and they just have no idea how to actually run against him. They all realize that they need to take him down a peg if they're going to have a shot at winning. Either that, or they need to keep him from getting a majority of delegates so they can steal it on the second round.
Nobody really did land a shot, though. And I didn't see a single, and I think, again, it's just they don't know how to grapple with this because they think of him very much through a cable news mindset.
Right.
I saw that with Pete, that clip that you played of Pete talking about, it's like, man, voters don't care. That is the opposite of what people care about, but that is, and I tweeted this at the time, I was like, man, this guy knows exactly how to appeal to a cable news producer.
Yes.
That's exactly the type of thing people in cable, New York and DC, be like, oh, these horrible attacks, my God. And that's the type of thing that they'll play. But normal voters are there for the discussions on healthcare. They're there for the discussion on the economy. I think that thing that you played about the billionaire thing, that is going to connect 10 times more than anything about Bernie Bros on Twitter or whatever. It reveals their elite biases.
Yes.
And they haven't yet processed about what it's like if you were to attack him. So I think there's plenty.
They can only grapple with, first of all, they still have wrapped in their head that he's divisive and that people don't like him, which is just not actually the case. And then the other thing that they can only sort of deal in are these symbolic type of politics around civility or
how are you going to pay for it? I'm like, that's not the question. It's not about the tax and all that. It's like, again, and I've said this many times, the debate on Medicare for All won't hinge on whether taxes are going up. They're going to go on, do you trust this person to actually get it done?
Right.
If you're going to screw with the healthcare system like Barack Obama did, do you actually would you trust the follow through on that? That is very much up in the air, by the way.
Who's going to fight the hardest on it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think everybody knows what the answer is to that. Who's most committed to it? Who's going to fight the hardest on it? That's what it really comes down to.
And it all comes down to your trust and to be able to navigate the political process. I think it's a very open question in terms of anybody's record in trying to screw with the healthcare system. But I don't hear any of that coming from Joe Biden.
Right.
Yeah, because he screwed up Obamacare. So there you go.
Well, if he might try to make the case, but
I don't know if
it's hard to interpret exactly what that man is saying.
All right. Next up, friend of the show, D.C. Bureau Chief of The Intercept, Ryan Grimm. He shares his debate thoughts.